Hi, I'm Moira Gamble and welcome to Masterclass number 8. In this masterclass, I wanted to explore ways to create a livelihood with permaculture, something that can support your permaculture way of life using the ethics of permaculture. So for me, a permaculture type of work is very much an ethical livelihood. It's about working with nature and creating a sustainable income that supports your work-life balance. It's something that you can cultivate a level of diversity and ongoing interest and curiosity for yourself and ongoing learning. And it's about creating abundance too, but in a whole sense of abundance. So looking at how to cultivate not only your capital, but your social capital and the environmental capital. And it's really a whole systems approach. And applying the regenerative thinking that you apply to permaculture design and permaculture land management and also permaculture community development to actually looking at how you can create that in your own economic system for yourself and for your family. So at the foundation of cultivating a permaculture livelihood, this is a key starting point, actually doing a permaculture design certificate course. This is the international standard around cultivating permaculture understanding. So starting next week on June the 25th, I'm offering the first ever the comprehensive online course that blends both the permaculture design certificate course and the permaculture teacher certificate course. And at the end of this, weaving in modules too that help you to cultivate your enterprise, your eco enterprise. So this is the course, and I'll talk more about this at the end. But before I start into looking at those 7 different ways that I've identified as making a living in permaculture, I wanted to refer to Bill Mollison, the founder of permaculture. Well, actually the co-founder with David Holmgren. And one of the quotes is that we need to do more than just grow our own vegetables, which important that is, of course. It's the foundation of creating sustainable local economies and sustainable local food systems. But what Bill was talking about, we need to examine the roots of the problems of world hunger, resource depletion, and make big changes in the prevailing financial system. So he's looking at how we can actually, through our own life and livelihood, contribute to the well-being of other people and the well-being of the planet, but also try and pull the rug out of our current financial system. So that requires us to actually look at our own work and at where we put our money, where we save our money, the sorts of investments that we support. And so it's kind of a bigger picture approach to looking at how we can live a permaculture lifestyle, but with all these other systems in place, what are often called the invisible systems. And Bill also said we're surrounded by insurmountable opportunities. And the thing is that wherever you look, there are opportunities to make positive change. And so the idea is that taking the framework of permaculture and looking in your own environment, in your own community, to find the niche, to find that point where you can take this thinking and apply it and create a livelihood out of supporting the earth and supporting the people and supporting your family simultaneously. So the 7 ways to make a living with permaculture that I'd like to talk about, and I know that this is just a beginning. Yeah, of course there are just numerous ways of doing this, but I really wanted to identify these 7 because I think they're a good starting point. And of course they can ripple off in all different directions. But what I really wanted to talk about today was the fact that permaculture can be a platform that you can weave into your current work, that you can take to make a leap into a different way of life, or to create new and innovative enterprises that are something that perhaps we hadn't thought about before. But it provides that the thinking and the framework and the ethics to guide that. So these are the 7. So educate, design, grow, make, organize, communicate and collaborate. So let me work through these. But firstly, I wanted to just touch base on the idea about working from an earth-centered perspective. So often we've seen up on the top left-hand corner, you see the diagram, which is the diagram that you often see, which is the environmentally sustainable development, where you say, okay, we have this stable tripod of the economics, the social, and the earth-based thinking, and that when we intersect those, we get sustainable development. But what it actually has ended up being is this diagram below, kind of like the Mickey Mouse look, where everything is guided by the economy and marginalises the social and the ecological. What we need is a different way of thinking about how we see ecological limits. And it's actually saying, okay, we live within the ecological limits of our planetary system. And within that, we have our social systems, and within the social systems is the economic system. So the economic serves the social on the earth, and that we're always having that earth-centered perspective, so that wherever we are in the type of work that we're doing, that we accept those ecological limits and try to work out how we can create our livelihoods that actually have this as our core thinking. And at the start, I guess I also wanted to mention too that one of the key things about creating sustainable or regenerative livelihoods is actually simplifying. And I think this is the first thing. It's about considering our consumption, our needs, and reducing those, and thinking about other ways of doing things. The ecological footprint studies show that in order for everyone to live, say, like the average Australian, if everyone in the world lived like the average Australian, we would need 4 Earths or more now. We only have one. So essentially what we're looking at is how can we cut our consumption and our waste by 80%, but still live a really high quality life where we have ongoing learning and fulfillment and all these things that we want, but in a much simpler way. And so this might be thinking differently about our needs in terms of our clothes and our food and our homes and our landscapes and our entertainment and all the different sorts of things, to really actually closely look at how you can diminish your consumption, and particularly consumption of single-use things which have a negative impact on the world, and how you can perhaps, return to things like, simply making clothes or trading clothes or secondhand clothes or upcycling things, using as much local and simple food as possible, and also really learning a lot from traditional ways of living in the land and living in the landscape, and wherever that might be, wherever you are in the world, to really look at how the cultures of sustainability in your place worked, and what can we learn from that. So really the core behind all of this, within the earth-centered perspective, within that idea of simplifying our needs. So for example, I've actually managed to try and work that I only have 1 day a week that I work for income, and the rest of it is actually for doing other work. So I'm still working, doing education work or community work or things with my family and in building or whatever it might be. So that simplification can also really make a huge difference in your own pattern on a weekly basis. And in that, it's about finding your purpose. So what are the ethics and what are your motivations and what is your intent? And this is really very much the foundation of holistic decision making, that until we have that intent of the why are we doing this, what is it, why is it important to us, that everything else can hang off that. That's the core decision that we need to make. So what is our reason for doing that? How is it that we're wanting to live? What are the values that we hold strong? What is the contribution that we'd like to make? What are the sorts of sense of freedoms within our ecological limits would we like to have? Sort of having free time or creating more time in our life to do things which make us feel more fulfilled. So before we even start to think about what it is, it's the why. And I think we need to stop at that point and really reflect on that, but not just to do it once, but to continuously reflect. And I find it really useful to do this at least once a year or even every 6 months, to actually come back to that purpose and to check in to see, okay, this direction that I'm heading, this really fits with my why. And sometimes, when things get really a bit chaotic, it's a really good point to actually stop and to reassess things and to maybe shed a few things that actually don't really fit with that core why and that core ethic. And another thing that I really wanted to mention too was about diversification. And in order to create often a permaculture way of life based, a permaculture livelihood, we often need to wear many hats and to be resilient and also embrace a lot of seasonal variation. Sometimes there may be a big flush of times when there's educational opportunities with children, for example, during holidays, and then seasonal patterns for, abundances in the garden, or all these different things, and creating a livelihood that is based around these seasonal variations. And that's going to be different for wherever you are, and creating this pattern of waves of work that work with what's around you. And I really love that, because it also means that I can stay interested in a lot of different things, because there's the variation consistently. So the 7 ways of making a living with permaculture. The first one I mentioned was through education. And I've been teaching permaculture in maybe 20 different countries over the last 25 years, and the type of education that you can offer through permaculture is so diverse. So I've worked with young children in kindergartens, in schools, creating nature kids programs and various sorts of permaculture clubs. I've worked with youth running camps, permaculture camps, and classes for that group of people, and events, particularly, maybe involving music and theatre. But also, of course, the whole range, the spectrum of courses that you can offer for adults, the permaculture design course, the permaculture teacher course, the advanced permaculture courses in design, maybe earthworks courses. Another way of offering permaculture is through community workshops. Now, this could be through your local neighbourhood centre, or your local library or community garden, or even in your backyard. There's a new trend for cultivating online courses. Now, this doesn't have to be the full permaculture design course. It could be small courses about beekeeping, about mushrooms, about perennial growing, about how to process the materials from the garden. So there's a lot of different ways of offering online courses, community workshops and community courses. Now, also, one of the things that I feel when I'm actually working with design clients is that is too an educational process, that it's almost like a mentoring, a one-on-one process of collaborating with a design client to create a design that fits with their landscape and their needs, and it's something that they will have the understanding of to continue on as they continue to develop it. But permaculture is something that I've also been able to weave into lectures, and I regularly run tours of our eco-village and gardens and other permaculture gardens as well. So it can be formalised in terms of school setting or informal in the community, and all ages. So really it's up to where your passion and your interest and your connection with permaculture and your place to find those niches. And the thing that I've always found very useful is to start small, start close, build up your skills, build up your experience, build up your techniques of teaching, and then gradually, as you feel more confident, just to keep moving out. It's very much like how we talk about designing and starting your permaculture garden, your zone 1 right in close to home. So design is obviously another way in which you can create a livelihood through permaculture, offering design services, but also designing programs, designing various sorts of educational programs and events, and also through a process I call citizen design, which is working with community groups to enable a collaborative design process of public landscapes. So it's working with communities to redesign the commons for permaculture projects, and it's a really exciting space. It's just starting to take off. And this kind of design work does enable you also to take your family with you. I've ended up in lots of different interesting places with animals helping me to design and children helping me to design, and the people involved in the project also getting involved. And so it's I don't see permaculture design, as something that's really done, you go back into your studio and you're designing up things for someone else. It's actually very much a mutual process, a mutually beneficial process, a collaborative process. And I really love that interaction that you get in creating and designing and thinking together. So an obvious way of making a living in permaculture is through the growing itself. And this is just a beginning list of some of the things that you could do. Of course, it's growing food of all different sorts, from the annuals to the perennials to the fruits to the meats to the eggs. You can collect seeds and sell the seeds. There's the seedlings, herbs, medicinal plants, cultivating up some perennial plants to sell. So like a nursery, and maybe selling some trees and bush tucker plants, timber plants, plants to regenerate your local environment, pond plants, aquaculture plants, actually cultivating plants which can be used for mulch, or growing out worms, so you can sell worms, or chickens, breeding up chickens. So whichever zone that you're looking at within your permaculture system, there are elements that you could take to be your farm zone within your permaculture system, and use that as the place in which you can generate some money. Now, again, this is seasonal variations, of course, would come into play with this. So perhaps that's part of the design planning that you could think through, that in different parts of your year there will be different abundances, and these are parts of your economic plan that you have that support perhaps doing some education work, doing some growing work, doing some design work, and having something that's coming in all throughout the year. So it's like planning your food for us, that you're wanting to make sure that there's amount of food that's continuously coming out of your garden system that's going to be able to feed you. It's using that design principle to design your livelihood, so that there's always something coming that will nourish and support your economic needs. Permaculture systems have such a diverse amount of products that are available within them, from the fruits to the herbs to the vegetables, the flowers, all different parts of a permaculture system. When it's fully functioning, there is so much abundance. And so what do you do with that? You can value add, you can dry, you can turn it into salves, you can make preserves, a whole range of food products. And so I love this part of the permaculture garden and my permaculture lifestyle. Some of it is for generating income, but often it's for trading, but it's also for saving a huge amount of money. The fact that I'm able to make my own cheeses and my yogurts and my salves and my teas and all of those things actually saves me an enormous amount of money that I don't need to spend otherwise, by having to go and spend buying organic products elsewhere for that. So there's the two sides of this, and I think it's a really important part to value. Often we think, we don't have time to make, but actually if we make the time to make, we need less time to actually generate the income to get those quality of products that we would be spending an enormous amount of money getting. But within that too, there's other things that we can make. So for example, we can be making worm products. So we could be selling the worms and the worm castings, and perhaps worm towers and homemade worm farms. There's other things such as constructing chicken tractors, resources and tools and equipment that is very useful for people wanting to set up permaculture systems, that some people have the skills to make and others don't. And so you can sell them at local markets, you can sell them online. Actually having an online marketplace makes it very easy for us to to create these things and to trade them locally, but also trade them a little bit further afield within our bioregion or beyond. So communication is also a really important part of a possible permaculture livelihood, and it actually forms a very important part of my livelihood. And I wanted to share a little bit about this with you, because the way that I work is I quite often have local talks and workshops, the online courses and workshops, but also speaking, going on speaking trips or contributing to books, contributing to magazines, making films and contributing to films, the blog, creating an image bank, or a gallery of images that are able to be drawn upon, writing reports. I wrote a report about the potential for urban agriculture in the metropolitan planning process of Brisbane, for example, about 15 years ago. And I've written several other reports since and research papers. And these are also an important part of a permaculture livelihood. So it's the documentation, it's the research, it's the recommendations. And these, I think, are really broaden out and stretch the possibilities of how other people can connect with permaculture as well. So you may have a strength in gardening, or you may have a strength in writing, or you may have a strength in filmmaking, or you may be a photographer. And so how can you take that skill that you feel really strong in and apply that with the permaculture thinking? So it doesn't always have to be the growing part. That could just be what you do for your personal use. You're growing your own food, but it doesn't. Making a living out of permaculture doesn't necessarily mean you have to become a permaculture market gardener. It would be great, but the more that we have of those, the better, absolutely. But I guess I'm trying to suggest that there's many different ways that you can become a permaculturalist in a professional way. And so really try and tease out the opportunities that may be there for you. And perhaps it's in organisation. One of the things I really love doing is organising festivals or cultural events, seminars and educational programs. So you may like being the teacher, but you also may like to be the person organising it and planning it and developing up the curriculum and the programs and organising the fundraising for it and communicating around getting those programs up and running, which is really important. So these are really great ways to actually develop a bigger sense of a program in your local area that you can invite other permaculture teachers and enable other people to create a livelihood with you around this, which is really my last point about collaboration. I think in order to unlock the potential of creating a really vibrant permaculture livelihood, collaboration is the key thing. It's really about cultivating a shared economy, a sharing economy too, where you can work together with other people in your local area or across boundaries to cultivate something bigger than what you're able to do yourself. You know, you have a certain set of skills, you have a certain amount of time that you can do things and a certain reach yourself. But by collaborating with other people, it's like creating a guild. And that's a concept within the permaculture landscape, creating guilds, your own guilds of people that help to support each other. So say, for example, if it's in design, you might want to gather a team of people that have, like a real focus on water and soil and design facilitation and the drawing side of things. And together you make this absolutely amazing team. And maybe you don't collaborate on all the projects, but together you might come together on one project, then there's a different form of collaboration on another one. So that sort of informal collaboration is a really fantastic way of working. So you stay as sort of autonomous entities in your own right, but you collaborate continuously in different ways. And there's some kind of thing that emerges out of that that's bigger than all the parts of itself, and it makes work, it makes it so much more fun and interesting too, rather than just, in your own place. Quite often, permaculture designers or teachers are, in their own little gardens or in their own spaces and need to find those points of connection. So this is a really important part, I think. And, it could also be about setting up cooperatives that help to support the distribution of permaculture-related products, or collectives, simple collectives. For example, I mentioned the cow collective that we're part of in terms of sharing our dairying experience. But there's also local arts collectives in my local town. So, for example, there's 30 different artists that come together and look after a particular gallery. So once every 30 days, it's an artist's time to be in a shop and selling and representing everyone's work. And then the other 29 days, it's their time to create. And so this collective space of having a collective gallery means that it supports everyone to be creative, but it also supports everyone to get their work out there to generate an income to support their work. And so these shared spaces, whether they be for shared offices or shared creative spaces or shared sales places or anything like that, that gives you an opportunity to collaborate and create something that's bigger than what you're able to offer yourself and make a bigger impact in terms of your reach and your potential to heal the earth and make a contribution to the community. If you're really interested in looking at ways to cultivate a permaculture livelihood, I think the perfect place to start is in doing a permaculture design certificate and weaving in that too the permaculture teacher certificate. It gives that opportunity to teach and design and grow and look at ways to cultivate that sense of holistic approach to livelihood. The course that I'm offering, which is actually an online course, it gives you a chance to do all of this, but in your own place, in your own community, and through this course to develop up your garden system, or whether that be your own or in a community or in a school, to develop up your teaching skills and actually start to develop up your own course materials and develop up your own workshops. But also within the end of this, to actually start to look at your business planning process and how you can create a really good enterprise that has the ethics and the earth-centered philosophy at the foundation. And so this is what the course is really about. How can you take permaculture and weave it into your livelihood? And so I really hope that you'll join us at the Permaculture Education Institute. You can find all of the information there on this website. It starts on June the 25th. This is the launch day, the first ever launch date. However, you are welcome to join at any point in time. But we've got a group of people from around the world. There's almost 100 people who are about to start this course. And we're absolutely excited and delighted to be welcoming our first students into the Permaculture Education Institute. So I look forward to welcoming you too. And so just to reiterate the key points that I have talked about in this masterclass. So the key areas, the 7 ways to make a living with permaculture that I have mentioned around education, around designing, around growing, around making, and communicating, collaborating with others and organising. And so, of course, as I mentioned right at the outset, there is so many different ways that you can make a living with permaculture, and it is really up to your intent, your passion, your interest, your creativity, the opportunities that you see in your particular community and environment, and whether you take permaculture and make it your complete livelihood or whether you weave it into things that you're currently doing. So permaculture can be your livelihood as well as a lifestyle, and it is such a fantastic way of life. Why not make it something that supports you economically as well? Because there is so much positive work to be done in the world, and this gives you opportunity to make a positive contribution that's very much about caring for the earth at the foundation of everything, that it's a very much earth-centric approach and a life-centric approach, supporting the earth systems and all life on earth through this way of work. And I love the fact that permaculture work is diverse, and it's a way of actually simplifying and living a simpler way of life and drawing on the abundances that we find within ourselves, within our communities, within our neighbourhoods and around us, but in a way that not depleting the abundance, but creating a regenerative abundance. And the work itself is not an end in itself, not going to work to do a thing. It's actually about working that's creating something greater, about making it's that contribution, I guess, that idea that when you're working in a permaculture system, particularly with education or creating gardens or enabling people to also live a more sustainable way of life, there's a ripple effect. And I guess that's that ripple effect that I think is so powerful. And that by working in a permaculture way of life too, and it's that feedback loop, if you take the principle of observe and adapt, that you can do that in your work life as well, that you evolve it. So that, for example, when I was young, we did a lot more international travelling and with the permaculture teaching. And then when I had young children, it was more about local communities, and I was doing a lot more work with kids. And now that the children are getting older, I'm working more with youths, and it evolves and changes with your life and where you are at the time. And you can bring your family and your life along with your work, and it's not these separate entities. And I love the idea of it being a hugely collaborative process, and to think of that as being a collaboration with nature. So we acknowledge that on a daily basis we are collaborating with nature and others, and that we weave that into our way of thinking about our work. I think that's just a magical thing. So I want to thank you for listening to this masterclass, and I really do encourage you to add in comments and ideas about how you feel that you could possibly make a living from permaculture. And I'd love to see some comments down the side. But don't feel you need to share. It's also something that you could just quietly now go away and think about all the possibilities that you could do to actually make permaculture your livelihood, and how it can perhaps transform the way that you generate your income, or how you can use it to make a contribution. Thank you so much for joining me today for the 7 ways to make a living with permaculture. I hope there was something within there that maybe could tweak a possibility of an idea. As I said, there is no possible way that I could mention everything that you could do to make a living with permaculture. This is just a starting point of different ideas and different ways that you can come out and approach the permaculture way of life as a livelihood. Thank you for attending this session. The next masterclass is going to be on July the 30th, and the topic for that session will be decided by you tonight. So please get on to the poll, which I'll put up now, and you can vote for which question that you would like to explore next time. So I'm Maura Gamble from the Permaculture Education Institute. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that I'll see you inside the Permaculture Educators course. Don't forget, you can find out all the information about that on the Permaculture Education Institute.org website.